Hey guys, so I'm doing something a little bit different today. I am doing a stitch tutorial on the lazy daisy stitch or the single chain stitch or the detached chain stitch. I'm sure it has a million names. So these are always kind of interesting to watch, I think, because it's hard to get the setup right and you want to make sure you're showing everything you want to show and that it's clear. So I hope I did that in the best way that I could. I am not an expert at this stitch. In fact, if you've watched my whip updates, you know that I got kind of mad at it when I was doing the Dinky Dye samplers because they were everywhere and I was so tired of them. But hopefully I could break it down for you to its most basic form. I always took it as 2 separate steps to make sure that you get a nice looking lazy daisy every time. It's just a loop and a stitch. That's all it is. My 2 pieces of advice before I send you to the close-up video are make sure you have a long length of thread when you're doing lazy daisies. I find that they get really difficult as your thread gets shorter. And my second piece of advice is make sure you keep your thread not twisted. So if you're using 2 strands, which I did in this demonstration, if you use 1 strand, it's gravy. You don't even have to worry about it. But if you use 2 strands, just make sure you let your needle drop and unwind every once in a while so that you don't get little twisty loops in your stitches. The tutorial that I watched when I was looking at how to make lazy daisies is Mary Corbett's tutorial from Needle and Thread. I will link that down below. It's a video, it's on YouTube, it's perfect. It shows you 5 different ways to do them, and she's such a pro. So if you just want to not watch this video and watch that one, that would probably be totally great. But if you want to see me attempt to teach you how to do a lazy daisy, then stay tuned. So when you're stitching a lazy daisy, it's important to start with a lot of thread. I find that these stitches get really difficult the less thread you have. So start with a nice long piece, and there are 2 sections to a lazy daisy. There's the loop, and then there's the stitch that holds the loop flat on top of the fabric. So there are lots of ways you can do these. You can really do it in one smooth motion if you feel comfortable enough doing it that way, but I'm going to show you the way that I did them for the best results, which is 2 separate steps. So I have my thread up on the front of my fabric here. This spot, this hole, is going to be the point of the lazy daisy petal. So that's this hole. So first we're going to make a loop, which just means that we put the needle, back into the fabric in the exact same hole. And we've made a loop. And then the only other thing you want to do, I'm just going to hold the loop down with my thumb here, is choose where you want the lazy daisy to end. So let's say here. This is going to be your stitch that holds the loop. So you're going to pull that through the fabric. You're going to catch your loop. So if you look at it from the top here, this is the loop, this is the stitch. So you want the loop to lay flat on the fabric. So you're just going to bring your needle through your loop. This is going to make sense in a second. And then when you pull, there's your stitch. So you can see the 2 separate parts. There's the loop, and then there's the stitch. And then to finish it off, you just want to bring the needle back down into the fabric in the next closest hole to finish your stitch. So it is a little bit of a tricky stitch. You do have to make sure that your loop is laying flat. You don't want it to be all twisted up unless you're just using 1 strand, in which case that wouldn't matter. You can play with it a little bit if you want to tighten the loop up. You can just tighten up that stitch. We'll do another one here. So you first pull your needle through the fabric where the point of your lazy daisy petal is going to be, so the beginning of your loop. Then you want to go back down in that exact same hole and make your loop. You can keep this as big as you want, as big as you're comfortable with. I like to hold it down with my thumb just so it stays flat, but we'll make it a little bit smaller there. So there's your loop. And then you want to pick the spot where your lazy daisy will be held down by the stitch. This is kind of tricky pattern-wise. Sometimes, I mean, if it's charted, it's taking up a certain amount of space on the chart. So what I did sometimes was I counted boxes, like if it was 4 holes diagonally to where they wanted the point to be, that was how big they wanted the stitch to be, but that doesn't really matter. I found, at least in my Dinky Dyes samplers, that I could kind of make them whatever size I wanted to make them, so I didn't worry too much about counting and finding the specific hole where it was supposed to, the stitch was supposed to go. So let's just make this one a little bigger. So there's our stitch. And so if you pull your thread tight at this point, this loop will just disappear. You'll just have this stitch. So you can do that, you just have to start from the beginning. So before you pull it tight, you just want to catch that loop so that it can lay flat. And then just anchor that stitch in the next hole. So as you get more comfortable with these, you can start to put the 2 steps just into 1 step. Like I said, you don't have to do it this way. The stitch is going to end up looking the same. But what you can do is when you're pulling your thread through to make your loop, normally this would be 2 steps, the first of 2 steps for me. But what you can do when you put your needle back through the same hole to make the loop, you can also put it through the fabric to the point where you want your stitch to be. So that way, when you pull your needle through this way, you have your loop made and you're already in your spot for the stitch. So that's just a little more, it cuts down a little bit on the steps, but again, you can make it as many steps as you want to in order to be comfortable with it. So at its most basic form, Lazy Daisy is 2 steps, and that's how I do mine. That's just the easiest way I found to make them all look even, especially once you start to run out of thread. It can get a little bit tricky to do all in one. So I'll just show you one last time. You want to bring your needle up through the fabric at the point where you want to make your loop, which is this point in the stitch. And you're going to make a loop by putting the thread back down through the fabric in the exact same spot. So there is our loop. And I usually just hold it down with my thumb. And then I come up away from the loop at the spot where I want the stitch to be that holds the loop down. That's this stitch. And then I just catch the loop with my needle and anchor the stitch in the next hole. And that's it. So you can kind of like fluff them up. I always got frustrated when in the pattern the Lazy Daisies looked really nice and like spread apart. The only way you can really do that is by keeping them kind of loose. If you don't pull the loop very tight, you can make it quite big. The tighter you pull the loop, the more you're just going to have like kind of a really thin petal like this one. And that's your Lazy Daisy.